There are three things that are kind of counterintuitive from what you mostly heard. People will tell you, oh, well, a story is a beginning, a middle, and an end, and they'll think that that's all I have to do. No, the real elements of a successful story are a character I care about. Who is the star of the story? And by the way, don't make it yourself. Even if you are central to the action, make somebody else the hero. I'll get into that in a little bit more. The second is you've got to have a compelling conflict. There has to be some tension, some challenge for the hero of the story to overcome, some kind of situation that people can identify with, to think to themselves, wow, are they going to emerge from this? They have to be, for a time, obviously they're going to, probably 9 times out of 10, they will successfully emerge from whatever kerfuffle has happened. But there needs to be, at a point in the story, doubt as to the outcome. And conflict is essential, something that has to be resolved. And then finally, and this is to me one of the most important things people underestimate, you have to have a moral. What was this for? Why did I tell you this?
Hi, it's Phil, and in this episode of Partnership Plus, we're going to dive into the art of storytelling and how to bring partners together to join forces in the way they express how they're going to change the world. We get a chance to meet Neal Foard, a storytelling expert and educator from storyfire.net, who has a huge volume of knowledge to share with us. You're going to love this conversation. So without further ado, let's meet Neal Foard. Well, everyone, today we have a huge pleasure in talking with Neal Foard, who is a storytelling expert and also an educator in this space. Neal and I came across each other. Well, I found Neal through one of his videos, which talked about the idea of talking to people about how they see the world. And I think it's fair to say that in the world that we live in right now, which is a little bit topsy-turvy, we are in desperate need of great stories that help us understand the bigger picture. And so I am hugely excited to speak with Neal today. Neal, I would love to understand the ingredients of a great story, how we come up with these enduring narratives so people can actually understand what we're talking about and get things moving. So listen, thank you for being here. And I'd love to dive into your backstory about who is Neal and why is it that he decided to dive into story and dedicate his life to that?
I came from 30 years in advertising, and I was on the creative side of the business where I was a copywriter originally. And then, you do advertising long enough, you realize, oh, it isn't enough to just communicate the idea to people. You have to get them lit up over it. In a way, every time you propose an advertisement to a client, you have to do an ad for the ad. And I found that the most enjoyable part of my job was the sort of showmanship associated with trying to persuade them that this is a good idea. And I wound up doing thousands upon thousands of presentations, discovering that the more fun you made it for the client, the more likely they were to buy. I mean, that may seem like a blinding glimpse of the obvious, but that the merits of a product are insufficient to persuade people. In fact, most of us don't even know a good idea when we hear it. If we all knew a good idea when we heard it, then we could all run movie studios and have a 100% batting average. But it's a very difficult thing to know whether or not something is going to work. So to dress it up in a kind of fun, rollicking and description was super helpful in persuading people. Well, you do that enough times. And like I say, I did thousands of individual presentations and in front of groups and sometimes very big rooms. You start to get an instinct for what is and isn't the right length, what is and isn't the right level of energy, and so forth. So in a way, I did my sort of 10,000 hours, as Malcolm Gladwell would say. And this lately, finally, people are coming around to the idea that, if I'm a CEO or I'm a CFO or I'm somebody who wants to play one of those roles, it's incredibly helpful to be able to describe to someone not just the numbers or not just the parameters of something, but rather couch it in a way that people can understand by analogy or simile or or personal lived experience where they go, oh, I see where that person's coming from. This is what I'm doing now. I actually have a course that I've put online, and the basis of the course is, you may not be aware what you choose to talk about is every bit as important as how you describe it, because from your choice of topic, people discern very much about your priorities. Like, do they go, okay, I could go on and on about it, but my background comes from propaganda, learning that it isn't enough to have a good idea. You have to persuade people to see the idea underlying it. And 9 times out of 10, it's better to tell that as a kind of narrative with a beginning, middle, and an end.
It's funny, isn't it? I remember leaving the army and finding my first job, not knowing really what anything outside of the military was. I was working in a bank, and we had some people come from the States to help work out how we would tell stories internally. And I'll never forget one of the statements that one of the executives from this firm made. He said, "We're trying here in a bank to create safe wonder." And this concept was designed to sort of allow you to feel inspired, which we all found was a bit difficult to do inside a bank. But when we realized how to tell a story very differently, and this is back in the early 2000s, when there was only just phone banking, internet banking wasn't even a thing. This idea of trying to do things virtually became really quite profound for people, more than we probably expected. So I hear the need for trying to get much of this story organized, and I always gravitate towards copywriters, because just coming up with the words and knowing how to craft a line is often so difficult for people. But people who are word wizards tend to really capture my imagination. So let's dive into the elements of a really successful story. And we all have our own memories of what great stories are. They might have been told to us by our parents, our grandparents. We might have seen it on a TV when there was still free-to-air television. We might be looking at Netflix now and saying, "Oh, what a story." What are those things that we're hunting for so desperately to express the things that are inside us?
There are 3 things that are kind of counterintuitive from what you mostly heard. People will tell you, oh, well, a story is a beginning, a middle, and an end, and they'll think that that's all I have to do. No, the real elements of a successful story are a character I care about. Who is the star of the story? And by the way, don't make it yourself. Even if you are central to the action, make somebody else the hero. I'll get into that in a little bit more. The second is you've got to have a compelling conflict. There has to be some tension, some challenge for the hero of the story to overcome, some kind of situation that people can identify with, to think to themselves, wow, are they going to emerge from this? They have to be, for a time, obviously they're going to, probably 9 times out of 10, they will successfully emerge from whatever kerfuffle has happened. But there needs to be, at a point in the story, doubt as to the outcome. And conflict is essential, something that has to be resolved. And then finally, and this is to me one of the most important things people underestimate, you have to have a moral. What was this for? Why did I tell you this? Even something really sort of blunt force of trauma like Fast and the Furious. Do you notice how much they bang away on family?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That is not accidental. God bless Vin Diesel for all of the, like I say, blunt force trauma, deep voice. He bangs away at family, so God bless him, because he does know people need to emerge feeling like this added up to something. And your moral is really important with the taste you leave in people's mouths. Do they feel good? Do they feel like it was worthwhile to hear this? Or was this really just you bragging about yourself? In which case, I'm left with a mouthful of ashes, and I don't want you to win. This is why it's so important that in a story, you do not portray yourself as the hero. Rather, you portray yourself as an observer who sees someone doing something admirable or struggling, and somebody else leaps in to help. And what this will do is this: you will still get credit for admiring that kind of action. But importantly, you're standing next to the audience, shoulder to shoulder watching the events. And now they feel like you're a friend for having shared that rather than somebody who was trying to self-aggrandize. I tell this in every pitch or every speech I give or every clinic I conduct. I hit everybody with this quote from George Orwell. No autobiography is to be trusted unless it reveals something disgraceful. Any man who gives a good account of himself is probably lying, since any life, when looked at from the inside, is really just a series of defeats. When you tell a story where you are the hero, they don't look up at you with admiration. They look up at you. They look at you with jealousy and skepticism. You think you're the hero of your story. You just made yourself unbelievable. So when telling a story, an essential element to it, okay, as I was saying before, it's like, I need a hero I can root for. I need a character that's compelling. I need to care what happens to them. 2, I need a conflict that they have to overcome. 3, I need there to be a resolution that teaches me something that I look back and I think that's worth repeating anytime I want to portray the same lesson. Okay. But also always remember, as part of that moral, it's not that I'm wonderful. Okay.
I get that.
Don't go there.
Now, this is interesting because, you see, Fast and Furious is a great example. I think maybe 8, 9 movies that have carried the narrative
right?
all the way through that, right? And then you've got on the other end of the spectrum, our attention span at 15 seconds.
What those movies do is they give you your medicine cloaked in action.
Right.
And I think Vin Diesel didn't get to be an actor except that he generated his own future. Nobody cast him in anything until he started making his own movies that he was in. So this is no dummy.
No.
Right?
This guy knows what's happening.
He knows what's happening. And Sylvester Stallone, it was the very same story. Rocky was a masterpiece at this idea of the underdog story. Wasn't that I won, it's that at least I have the self-respect of knowing I was still standing. We all glory in that, going, you don't have to win, you just have to try, and
life lesson.
Right. It's a lesson we can all embrace. Sylvester Stallone, people underestimate how brilliant that guy is, because what they do is, it's not a story about winning. It's a story about trying. And go ahead. Sorry,
man. Can we double click on that? Because this is one of the most important aspects of really anything in life. But when we think about how organizations, whether it be not-for-profits or government or companies, are trying to work out how to solve something together, there is this element of fear that I find always creeps in around, I think we can do it ourselves. We can go it alone. We don't need to have someone else's help to do this. And you look at this and just go, well, you just need to try. So if we think about, you're in one organization, I'm in another, we've decided somehow that we have to try and achieve an outcome together. And that we have to tell each other a story. And once we've got that set, we've then got to tell other people a story to believe that together we can create 5 instead of 2.
Mm.
Like, what is the approach to start crafting that story? Like when you've just got a pad and a pen and you are sitting down with a cup of coffee to get started for the first time.
Yeah.
How do you go from completely
from the blank page, right,
to something that is compelling using what you've just described?
I've got a good answer. I got a good answer for that. Here's what you can take the blank piece of paper and then you say, what do I know? What do I know? Here's what I know. These are the things I believe in. If I listed the 3 most important things to me in business, or the most important principles of the way I do business, your values absolutely have to be the alpha towards the omega, which is, and by the way, another interesting thing, I'll throw on another tip for that. These are the things I believe in. I'm looking for a partner that believes essentially the same thing, so that even if we disagree, we both know we're pointing this way.
Right.
Like, we may have friction, but that's healthy as long as we're both pointing north or east or whatever. Business cultures are vastly more important than people think they are. There's a phrase they use in Silicon Valley, which is culture eats strategy. Because people are going to do what they're going to do, and they're going to do the things they believe in, unless you force them in a position where they're doing things that they're uncomfortable about. And then they'll fight you every step of the way, sometimes passively, and that's actually worse than publicly. So let's start with this. You write down what are the things that are most important to me about the things I want to achieve, and the values that in the way I achieve those things. Now, here's another thing to write down. What would you never do? People often don't take the time to write down the rules they will not violate, the principles they will not betray, the values they will not compromise on. Let me give you an example from real life. Johnson & Johnson, who made Tylenol, the painkiller, they were faced with a very uncomfortable thing. I think this might have been the early 90s. I can't remember exactly. But there was a cyanide scare in Chicago. Some douche nozzle had spiked Tylenol in the Chicago market with cyanide deliberately to drive the stock price down, and he was shorting it. And this was the way for him to make a lot of money.
Right.
Well, the FBI finally tracked him down, and what they did also was that they confronted Johnson & Johnson with, this is happening, but we believe it's isolated to the Chicagoland market. So rather than pull your products from all over the country, we're 99% sure you can do it in just Chicago and you'll be okay. But because Johnson & Johnson said, our number one principle, our value, it either means something or it doesn't, we will never take chances with the health of our customers. I don't care if it's 1%. If it's 1%, we're yanking it from the entire country's stock shelves. It's going to cost us millions. But because they had this value, this is something we will never do. Perversely, the stock price skyrocketed after the event because people realized, oh, you can trust these people.
Right.
Which means that the brand name is more valuable than before this whole thing happened. So when you sit down and you're thinking about your rules for who do you want as a partner? I need somebody who will agree with what we're trying to accomplish using the ethics and the values that we agree with. But these are some things we will never do. And if you would do those things, this is non-negotiable. This is not a partnership I want to be part of.
Right.
Anytime you can define for your workforce, these are the things we do. These are the things we will never do. Now everybody knows the rules you play by. It's so much easier. It's really important that people know what you're never going to do. They know what they get punished for. They know what compromises will get them fired. They know what compromises would really be disappointing. And they know when to whistleblow on stuff like that. That's really important. You know,
it's interesting when we think about the ways in which those principles need to be established. We have a process when we share this with clients where there's a one-page principle slide, and I'm often greeted with this: "Why do we need that?" And I said, "I don't think you can afford not to have it." And as soon as they get to that point, it's usually quite easy for them to fill it out, but it's not something they natively think about when they're trying to get to a point of partnership. It's super interesting, and when for everyone who's watching and listening this, if this is resonating with you, storyfire. Storyfire.net, right? Is that the right URL? Storyfire.net. Okay.
.net. Yes.
Okay, let's do that again.
Thank you for that, Phil. That plug, by the way. God bless you. I did this thing for you, and I didn't realize you and I are in different time zones. It's Thursday morning at your thing, so I'm going to write down the URL.
The sun still comes up. It's a good next day. For anyone listening who is listening and this is resonating, storyfire.net is the destination you need to think about going to in order to start to unpack a lot of these principles, because this is where story really happens.
Thank you for that plug. Yes, storyfire.net in the USA. I want to throw something else out about about when you are sitting down to create a narrative that people will understand and so on. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes you can achieve a story just by coming up with the right metaphor. So I'll give you an example. I have a friend in Wyoming. There's a lot of business going up in Wyoming, but Wyoming is not a very populated state in the United States. And so it's difficult to get highly trained, highly skilled people up into that market unless they love the big outdoors and they love a lifestyle where there aren't many people around. And so what he's doing, I think, is a brilliant notion. It's like, brother, you don't need to be spending your marketing money on advertising your product. What you need to be doing is advertising to attract the right people to you. We actually have to spend marketing money to get the right people to you. And businesses were a little skeptical of this. And then he struck upon this metaphor. He goes, okay, college football coaches. College football coaches are renowned for their work ethic. They have to work during the season. They're working between 80 and 100 hours a week, 7 days a week. They are, during the off season, they're working 60 hours a week. Let me ask you this. If I told you that only 5% of their time was spent on coaching, like strategy and so forth, what do they spend their time on then? 70% of a college football coach's time is spent recruiting. The vast majority of their time is spent recruiting. Why? Because your chances of success are inextricably linked with the talent on the field.
Yep.
You have to get the players. It's no different for any business. If you're running an advertising agency, or you're running a welding shop, or you are a car design company, or you are a financial services organization, the quality of your people is the difference between being a runaway train of success and a pain in the neck where you have to supervise everybody all the time.
Amen. Yep.
And I thought he was just basically telling a story about the life of a football coach and how that impacts somebody who's running a granary in Casper, Wyoming. It's true. It's just true. If a football coach, and you know how football coaches are the absolute model of, they have to motivate, macho men.
Yep.
Well, this isn't some new age thing, baby. This is, you've got to persuade those players to come play for you and run through walls for you. How do you do it? You spend 75% of your time on it.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. And, when you think about the thousands of hours that have been in the delivery of these stories, not even thinking about the preparation that goes into creating all of these stories and these narratives, these pitches, was there one or a couple of those stories which really resonated to a point where you could just tell immediately on the pitch that you delivered for the story that you were presenting that it was nailed it? We've got it. They've really bought into that.
There was one case in particular where we actually reverse engineered advertising campaigns based on how we wanted to present them. So, and I was so proud of this because I thought I'd invented it. Apparently I hadn't, but this was the idea, Phil.
Okay.
It's like, look, I need for them desperately to approve a campaign by such and such date in order for us to achieve our aim of having this thing ready to go. We'd gone through a couple of rounds of creative development, and now we were really in time pressure. TikTok, we got to get an approval. So we said, what would be the perfect, what could you walk into that room and have them approve it just on the name of the campaign? We literally said that. What would get them to approve it just on the name of the campaign? So we said, all right, how about the SMART campaign? All right, good. Write that down. Okay, how about the winner campaign? Yeah, so far so good. How about the repeat business campaign? That was our starting point, Phil, was what do we call it? And then ultimately we produced these little videos to explain the campaign idea. And the thing that won was in fact the SMART campaign. And we would say, so we'd like to recommend the SMART campaign because even dumb people know that it's smart, that they want to be smart. And what we're going to do is we're going to position your product and you as the smart choice, which means that anybody that decides not to do that is not being smart. They're being dumb. And that unlocked the gates. And I could tell you, Phil, I'm just looking at that table of decision makers and I'm going, I had them at hello. You know, you could just
It's,
tell.
it's extraordinary, right? And this is, I wonder, actually, my hunch would be once that meeting's finished, they've all gone to go and do what they need to go and do. And that one small commutable bit of information has found its way around water coolers at
Yeah.
lunch. Oh, we're doing this thing called the thing.
It was easy to repeat.
Propagates. Right.
You nailed it. It was
Right.
easy to repeat. Now, let me give you another of the benefit of your audience. I think they really going to want to know this. I was connected with a company called Artemis, whose specialty was they would help very large organizations who had high dollar contracts at stake, where they had to bid against other very big companies. I'll give you an example. It would be like a $900 million submarine project.
Right.
So if you're up against Raytheon and General Dynamics and all these other companies, when you go in that room, you better have your pitch down.
Yep.
And what I found out from their thousands and thousands of these cases was that there were certain elements, that went into the decision making of all of these procurement departments, and it wasn't nearly as objective as you might think. So, for example, if I said, okay, well, what are we going to be competing on? They would say, well, I'm guessing that 30% of the decision is going to be the price. Another 40% of it is going to be the technical specifications of what we're going to deliver. There's going to, and they would divvy up the decision-making pie and say this and this and this and this, and then it was not like that at all. Only 30% of a decision on something even as big as a $900 million submarine, only 30% of the decision was based on things like price, technical specifications, delivery date, and all of those objective things were only 30% together. Of more importance was understands me. Now, this is what this means. They understand what I'm trying to achieve. They know the pressures I'm under. They understand my priorities so that if we ever have to sacrifice one thing for another, they'll automatically know where I'm going to go. They understand the situation I'm in, the context of where I operate, what my time zones are, and so forth. You yourself have to be recording at 4 a.m. in Sydney in order to accommodate me on the Pacific Coast. You've done that. That communicates to me, you have really helped me out. You understand me. All right. So understands me was more important than technical specifications, the delivery date, and so on. Really? Yes. Guess what? The next biggest proportion was about the same, just a little bit less than the technical specifications was chemistry. Why would that factor so importantly? Well, because you think you build a submarine in a week? It's going to take us 6.5 years to deliver this thing, which means you and I are joined at the hip. We're married for the next 6.5 years. And if I find you repulsive, or you don't get me, or you're abrasive, or you're only self-interested, or, I just don't like the way you smell, that's a factor. I need to be able to conduct business with somebody whom I trust and enjoy their company, because it's hard enough delivering on these specs without having to go to war with you every day. Chemistry becomes a really important consideration. Do I believe them? Do I like them? Do I think they like me? Will they help me? Okay, then 15% of the decision was politics. Do they understand that it isn't enough for me to agree? I have to get my commanding officer to agree to this. Will they help me navigate my own company? Can you imagine what it's like in the Pentagon? Can you imagine? You were in the Army.
I cannot, but
right?
I can tell you that all of those things, like you think about a 6-year project. I mean, I think that's generous. You think then the lifetime of that piece of infrastructure and what needs to happen to keep it functioning over its its standard life, which I think is probably about 25, 30 years. Right.
And you and I, if this is successful or it's unsuccessful, we're going to have a lifespan long after this project.
Right.
And if you and I trust each other, that will be an astonishing gift from the universe, because I won't even have to go anywhere else next time. You get the inside track on the next one.
That's it.
But I'm not going to do it with they all realize these are careerists. These people have careers.
Yeah.
And this decision amounts to a lot more than getting it done by Wednesday. So, okay, what does all this add up to? It means that 71% of the decision on even something that big is not about the technical specifications or price. Therefore, when you go into any pitch like this, you have to communicate all of the 71% of the things. I understand the pressures you're under. The story I tell is, I know what you're facing. I know the environment you operate in. I am a partner to help you navigate those things. And I can be trusted, and I will give you evidence of this trustworthiness. And I also understand this. You can spend 25 years, you can be married to somebody for 25 years and never fuck around and never be unfaithful. But you do it once at 25 years and it's over. Mm. Therefore, I need to communicate that story to somebody that I'm going to spend 7 years with, which is, I know the significance of trust. How I was saying before, it's the things you won't do that matter as much as the things you will do. And you have to communicate. You can't put these up on bullet points on a screen and expect anybody to believe them. You have to give them the narration of, can I tell you about something that happened to me on the Seawolf project? It took me by surprise how important this was. Or can I tell you about an officer that I really admire? I think you might have crossed paths. Admiral Stockdale was a guy who was willing to do such and such. It has been a driving lesson in my life. I have adopted that. When you tell people these things, they know what matters to you. They get a sense of you. And that's when they start to say, I can have chemistry with this person, or I can see how he will help me navigate the politics of because Phil, you're never really the one that makes the decision. You're only part of the decision. You're part of the decision-making process. But,
it's so
like I'm going to go, they offered me a job in Minneapolis. My wife was determined to go to Los Angeles. She said, I will go with you to Minneapolis. But in that gesture, I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to go to Minneapolis. I know you're willing to go, but the fact that you're willing to go tells me you're willing to sacrifice, and maybe I'm willing to sacrifice too. There are jobs in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
I'll find a job in Los Angeles.
That's a masterclass in just understanding humanity and how people just connect. And you mentioned Jim Stockdale. The Stockdale paradox is one thing that I live by most days. And even though we talk about all of those component parts and how people will often over-rotate against the things that aren't important, they'll go towards the cost. They'll talk about all the ways that they can cut corners. They can do all these things. This is probably one of the key things to avoid in terms of the pitfalls of telling a great story. But when you reverse engineer what you've just talked about here, what should people avoid at all costs when it comes to telling a story? I have a funny feeling what you've just talked about is exactly the inverse of that, exactly what not to do. Yeah. But, there are a lot of people who are urgent, right? And they're impatient. And you can see that in the way they're trying to forge any kind of relationship. What are you looking for if you're on the receiving end of a story that says, look, sorry, you've lost me on this one?
Have you noticed comedians they sort of have to be very brilliant people. I had the good fortune to meet and briefly work with Bill Burr. I don't know if you know that comedian.
I know that name. Yeah.
Okay. So Bill Burr, he is a very clever character. He is 5 times smarter in person than he is on stage, and he's brilliant on stage. And what you discover is that stand-up comedians have 2 qualities that are really amazing. One is they have insight. They can see the contradictions and the flaws and the interesting paradoxes of life. They notice these things, and they notice them with sufficient perception that they're able to communicate these things. But the other thing that stand-up comedians have is stamina and grit. They will work a piece of material over and over. They're willing to get up in front of people and bomb. That's courage.
Oh, yeah.
right?
Yep.
They're willing to get up in front of an audience and bomb over and over until they worked it, until they unlocked it. So they're very persistent.
Mm.
And stand-up comedians for me are an example of they're smart enough to know it's not going to be fully baked the first time, and they're willing to go for it. Okay. When you figure out a story, when you work it, when you're willing to put in the work to film yourself on your phone telling a story, this is very uncomfortable for most people. They don't like to do it. It's effort. It's discomfort. But if you're willing to do it, so you can watch it and rehearse it and do it over and over and over enough times to where it looks like you're just making it up on the spot, baby, you're a professional now. Now you're a professional. So that if you have an important meeting coming up, people do not rehearse enough. They don't rehearse enough to make it look like they're making it up as they're standing up there. I'll give you a great example of a little trick that can actually, it's a little cheat code for making people think you're smarter than you are. So it goes like this. I was going to be in front of a bunch of PhDs at Amgen. Amgen is a biopharmaceutical company and it has the highest proportion of PhDs, the highest concentration of PhDs in the world per capita is in Thousand Oaks, California.
Wow.
Because of this, there's this row of big pharma up there, biotech. So you swing a cat, you're going to hit a PhD. And I knew that in that audience, I was going to be perceived because, they're highly educated people. So who am I? Who am I to teach them anything?
Yes.
So what I did was I baked in this little kind of moment of sort of embarrassing tangent where I said to the audience, I go, wow, this audience is really intimidating. I look around and I just see all of these PhDs and I'm thinking, oh man, swing a cat in here and you'll hit a genius. And then I went, whack, and then I went, sorry, that was a weird unplanned tangent. And the next slide said a weird unplanned tangent. So that I go, wow, that was a weird unplanned tangent. And then I advanced the slide and said, oh, was it? And this got a big laugh. And in that moment, they realized, oh, this whole thing is prepared and planned. They gave me credit for putting in the time that seemingly spontaneous moment was scripted.
Yep.
And now what they're doing is they're observing me for the rest of it. And they're going, yeah, but this is all note perfect. Like he's not saying anything he doesn't intend to say.
Yes.
And so when you are rehearsed enough to bake in seemingly spontaneous moments that reveal themselves as highly scripted, people will go, that's pretty good. That's it. That's pretty good.
Yeah, that's right. And it's funny, we had the fortune to see some of the world's greatest comedians come and visit Australia. We spent 2 hours with Jerry Seinfeld about a month ago. And of course, he's one of the comedy kings, but you look at the pace at which he moved through nearly 2 hours of content. He was heckled twice. He reset. He got back onto the place and just kept moving. And it was just remarkable. I mean, trying to just remember all that content. And we noticed one or two times where we'd seen him previously, but we noticed one or two times where something distracted him, but it was as if he picked up something from his library in his mind, pulled that back out and reinserted. And before we knew it, he'd gone through it. We'd all laughed another 10 times and then we were back on track again. And it was remarkable.
Seinfeld is a really, really good example of somebody who works to be great. He massages jokes endlessly. He's got this legal pad that he writes his jokes down on, and he is a craftsman. He's not doing crowd work. He is rehearsed and has his act together. And just as you describe, he has a bullet for every occasion. Yeah. So his gun is loaded for hecklers. And I've seen some brilliant takedowns. Eddie Izzard is perhaps the most intellectually brilliant of all the comedians. He learned to speak German and French so that he could do his act in France and Germany.
It's
Are you
quite something,
kidding
right?
me?
So this is a perfect segue to a question of culture and storytelling. So as I might have mentioned, before we started, I'm half Colombian,
Half Colombian.
and my mum can hold court storytelling like there is no one else. Like, people will stop in the street and be captivated by the energy that comes out of her. It's ever since I was born, this has been the case. And more often than not, maybe 80% of the time, when somebody inadvertently realizes that my mother is who she is, I will receive a call or a message saying, "I've just met your mum.
Isn't that great?
And you need to know I had this amazing time." So, I know that you spent time in Southeast Asia, in the late 90s. And in Australia, many times the mistake is made of looking at a country like ours and like the US, which is heavily multicultural, and expecting that you can deliver a message in a story because it's a geography. Yet when you look at the way that Asia is made up of just such a diversity of different cultures,
Right.
how does somebody get their mind around, if they're in a multinational business trying to think about doing local partnerships or localizing products? Like, how do you get your mind around the way of telling stories in cultures that, one, isn't offensive, but two, lands in a way that allows somebody to embrace a product or a service that is, that is visceral, but they might actually speak completely different languages and think about the world completely and fundamentally different?
First of all, kudos to your mother. To be around to see that. My experience is that any nations that are gifted at soccer, football, tend to be great storytellers.
Interesting.
That Brazilians are astonishingly energetic and entertaining storytellers. Colombia, another lively, Latin, passionate, just rollicking musical country of people that are alive. Mm-hmm. And so Brazilians, Colombians, Argentines, so Southeast Asia, that was my stomping grounds for just a couple of years. What I discovered and was surprised to discover is how I thought I was a good storyteller, only to discover that I was completely debilitated by the idioms and slang that I used. I had to readjust my vocabulary. Imagine this: I would use a term like my father, who emerged from Wyoming and then in the 30s and then lived in Los Angeles. He used to sound like he was right out of a detective story from 1940. And he would say things like this to me. He goes, "That isn't going to shave any ice. You read me?" And he would say, "Settle down." And, he sounded like right out of a film noir. Mm-hmm. I adopted many of my phrases from him, only to discover when I was in Hong Kong, it's like, no, they don't understand what you're saying at all. Also, Hong Kong is a notoriously fluid, the Cantonese in Hong Kong. They say that if you leave Hong Kong for 5 years, you'll come back and you won't know what anybody's talking about because the language is so alive and it will change all the time. What I learned from this experience was you must rely on the locals to express for you what you're trying to express. And the thing that really took me by surprise was how sentimental the Hong Kong Chinese were. There's so much pressure and so much suffering. And the same was true of the Vietnamese and the Koreans. The Koreans, they work so hard, and they don't have an emotional outlet until they see their entertainments. And then when they watch on the screen somebody doing something out of the goodness of their heart or sacrificing, especially for a sibling, like an older sister does something sweet and she sacrifices for her little brother. Oh, the buckets of tears that would come out because they're looking for a release. And it turns out these gestures of goodness to each other it was something they craved in their souls because they weren't getting it at the office. And so I wouldn't have known that except for the locals that were helpful to me would say, no. Humor doesn't work this way here nearly as much as let's just be sincere and let's communicate our dedication to these people. So I relied very much on my contacts in my regional network I said, look, all I'm trying to do is I need to communicate the following things. I'm relying on you to say them sincerely in a way that will resonate. Because, Phil, we don't have time for some of the stories I could tell you about how stupid I was. At one point, my regional boss, I said, I don't know why you don't fire me. I cannot imagine what value I'm contributing here. And he said, your benefit of being here is you are widely perceived in the region as a well-meaning country bumpkin. And why that's useful is they don't dislike you. The inter-office hatreds are so profound that your role is to just be the gasket between the hard surfaces. And if they think that the fact that your status is a well-meaning idiot helps me because they don't think you're capable of fooling them. So they trust you. So,
I imagine.
Try that on as a role.
Well, yeah, I feel like I've been in one of those before. I wonder, I wonder when it comes to this kind of authenticity and what really comes out in this conversation for me is the way in which you think about connection and how that needs to find a way to be transported from the mind and the story that you've created into someone else's mind. And I feel authenticity sort of oozing through how you would help people to create that. So when it comes to authenticity, I think some people can consider that, at one end of the spectrum, oversharing. And at the other end of the spectrum, a genuine desire to see the other person successful. Where should people be thinking about this? Because when you tell a story that you can see people like literally leaning into as you tell more and more about it, and they feel as though they can play a role, be an actor in that same story or aspire to be part of that narrative, how do we weave that in so that people can get better at that? Because this is a muscle, right? So we're trying to help people do this better and better each time. This role of authenticity, how should we be thinking about it?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I do a lot of consulting with CEOs and CFOs and COOs about they'll have to do an earnings call every quarter, or they'll have to do a company-wide meeting, or there's an acquisition, or they have been acquired, in which they need to communicate to their own teams, realistically, objectively, truthfully, what the situation is. And what happens is when a CEO, he is so accustomed, or she is so accustomed to having to walk this tightrope because shareholders can be disagreeable and hear the wrong things. And there's a rule I always use, which is it's not what you say that's important. It's what they heard that's important.
Oh, so true.
So it doesn't hurt actually to repeat certain things over and over so that there's no ambiguity about what it was you were saying. Also, advertising teaches you that as well. They only finally heard it on the 7th try. It's true. They didn't even hear it the first 6 times. Okay. So authenticity. It's exhausting to be a CEO and have to thread that needle and, walk that tightrope. It's exhausting. This is why I say that the beginning of any story is you writing down your real heartfelt values and the things you won't do. Because those are easy to remember. You don't have to memorize those things. They're just part of you. And the beauty of authenticity is just get in touch with the most important things to you. And don't be afraid to communicate, A, what those things are, and B, why they're important to you, why that matters to you. I had a friend who he was not a physically imposing. This was on the high school, and he was not physically imposing. I think he was all of about 5'5", a good solid 120 pounds. He would never stick up for himself. But if he saw a bully picking on somebody else, he saw a red mist, and pain was meaningless to him.
Mm.
He didn't actually feel it. He could get clocked right in the face and he wouldn't feel it, and he would keep coming. And there's something really frightening about a crazy person. And
Yes.
when somebody who is small comes at you, it's like, you and I both know, like there's the honey badger. It is outweighed by a factor of 5. And there are leopards that won't go near a honey badger because, in the words, I won't swear, the saying, which it does not give it doesn't care. It's coming at you. And when you know your values and you know the things you won't do, you don't have to play a role anymore. You just defend those things. Like somebody picking on somebody else, you don't care anymore about putting up a front. These are the things I won't do. These are the things I will do. I knew this car dealer, most brilliant car dealer I ever saw. He had a motto: I'll lose a little money to make a friend. And he was good to that. He was good to those words. I'll give you an example. A woman comes in, she's 75 years old. She's got a car that she hasn't traded out in probably, it's a 20-year-old car at least. So he's thinking to himself, she doesn't have a lot of money. I'm not going to sell her a fully loaded Camry. It's not going to happen. So what he would do is he would tell the service managers, listen, if somebody like that comes in, do me a favor. At your discretion, just give it to them for free. Just do the tune-up for nothing. Do the oil change for free. And don't tell them it's from me. Tell them it's from you. And the reason I want it to be from you is I want them to feel like they've got a guy in the car business. I want them to feel like they've got a place they can go who's sensitive to the fact that they don't have a lot of money. Now, Rick, just so you and I both know, the game we're playing, it goes like this. I'm not after her business, but she's got a son and he's probably flush. And if you give his mom free tune-ups, he's coming to you for his next Camry, right?
That's it. I have nothing else to say except that I get it. This is the thing I think people forget, particularly who come from a sales business development background. The best salespeople, I think, in my experience, will be doing that all the time because their aperture for the long game is excellent. But I worry that people have just forgotten how to go about having and building that relationship. We talk about collapsing the time to trust. Well, doing something like what you just described collapses it almost straight away.
Yeah, it collapses it to 24 hours.
Right,
yeah.
Right. And that's something else. Let me pivot a second. What is a story that was particularly difficult for you to try and tell through all of the different pitches you've had to do? What was the one that you looked at when you were given the brief as like, I have no idea how we're going to do this?
Well, the difficult thing to sell is what we were just talking about. It's very difficult to sell patience. It's really hard to say. People don't buy. It's very difficult to persuade somebody that when you run the ad on a Friday, you can't expect a 20% lift in sales on Saturday. That is not realistic. They don't want to hear that. And because they don't want to hear that, that means that somebody's going to tell them what they want to hear. And they're lying, but people are susceptible to that lie because they just don't want to know the truth. You have to persuade them. People will spend more. When love is involved, money is no object. Your first obligation is to make them love you. And how do you do that? You have to love them first. So, for example, you'll say to somebody, John, it's running your ad and just being perpetually on sale. All it's going to do is build an expectation that with you, it's all about the money and the urgency. And that's very off-putting for a lot of people. What you need to do instead is build a sense that you're worth the extra money because you are like them. So a great example is Procter & Gamble did this marvelous ad in the 2014 Sochi Olympics where A.G. Lafley, who was the chairman of P&G at the time, was watching time after time. People were coming into him with these ads from all of the various brands, Pampers and Tide and Bounty paper towels. And they were coming in and they wanted to do an ad for the product because they're going, man, we've got a captive audience. It's Olympics. It's a lot of people. We're going to sell the shit out of these paper towels. And he was frustrated because he's thinking, you just don't understand the context. This is an elevated moment in human civilization. This is when we're ostensibly putting aside our differences in order to celebrate human progress and achievement. And there are going to be, there are going to be moments of inspiration in this thing. Just do me a favor, go write me a love letter to my customers, which is brilliant. What they came back with was the most lyrical, beautiful case of, it started with these little babies who were all trying to walk and all falling on their little butts. Bump, bump, bump. A little Canadian baby, a little Russian baby, a little American baby, a little French baby. Boom, boom, boom. Then they were toddlers. And it's the same thing. They're bashing into things and they're falling down. And in every case, whether they're little babies or toddlers, their mothers are there to pick them up and keep them going. Mm-hmm. Now they're little kids and they're on ice skates and they're on skis and they're on snowboards and they're naturally crashing and bashing and falling down. And the mothers are there to say, up you go. And now they're junior mint players and they're getting bashed around and, they're getting injuries. And so the mom has to put the ice pack on the knee and on the shoulder and say, no, I know it hurts and so forth. I know you're cold. I know. And now they're athletes. And now they have a serious injury, or they've had their clock cleaned, or they just can't land that jump and they're really hurt. And the mothers are still there and they're in the rehab and they're, encouraging them. And here comes the moment of truth. They're in the Olympics and one after another of them finally lands that jump, finally manages to win that hockey game, finally manages to score. Who is the first person they look for in the audience?
Yeah.
They look for mom.
Mm-hmm.
And my favorite was the Canadian who he's absolutely swamped by the other players. And all you can see is through his little face mask is his eyes as he spots his mother.
Yeah.
And then the slogan is at the very end, it just says a little hashtag, because of mom.
Genius.
Right?
Genius.
Well, that was one case where there really was a spike on Monday. And the reason was when those mothers were in the audience at the supermarket, when they're on the shelves and they see the product, they go, is it worth an extra 25 cents to feel seen?
Oh, you bet it is.
Of course it is.
Yep.
Of course it is. Because every time they see Tide on the shelf, and every time they use a Bounty paper towel, and every time they see a Pampers diaper, what do they think of? They think, I matter.
Yep.
Now, you have to persuade people to wait long enough to where it finally settles down and they recognize it's you that said that message. You don't get it on one like they did on that one. You get it on, you got to keep the drumbeat up. And then but the beauty of it is eventually you can't be unseated. They can't discount you. I'm sorry, I'm not going to go with somebody who's cheaper because they're just after my money. But P&G sees me.
It's a profound way to connect, isn't it? I mean, and this is something which is, like you say, for the Olympics, I always look forward to the advertising campaigns because you know that the brands have put a lot of effort into trying to make that.
They finally tried.
Well, I mean, even in the most recent Olympics, you see some of these just spectacularly bad ads, and then you see the others because they've, some brand has decided let's do something different, and that was a mistake. Yeah. And then you look at some which have just gone extraordinary. We had, we were talking before about the age of our children, and for the most part, what they've been brought up with is stream television. So there has not really been advertising, right? That they've not really been part of that. And in the previous Olympics, not the one just past, not Paris, but before, there was this ad where they were sitting in front of the TV and they saw a piece of plastic fly out of a dumpster somewhere, and it goes through the air. It's flying through. Eventually, it travels and it gets in the ocean. And you see this piece of plastic on the surface gradually falling below the surface, and this fish comes to greet the piece of plastic.
Mm.
And just before the fish opens its mouth to eat the piece of plastic, it's picked up out of the sea by someone in a boat.
Mm.
And the someone in the boat then sort of puts it in a trash can, and it cuts away to black, and it says, Hewlett Packard, 50% of our computers are made from recycled plastic.
Mm.
And that night at the dinner table, our then 5 and 7-year-old turn to us and say, I didn't know plastic was in the ocean. And that started a completely different conversation.
Mm.
In fact, then we find ourselves in COVID and we're all locked down and we're educating these kids from home. It was like everybody, a tricky time. And in the afternoons, when they had a chance to go out and go for a walk, it wasn't just going to the park for a walk. They banded all the kids together in the neighborhood and they went and got gloves and they went and got trash cans and they went down to the seaside and they picked up rubbish because of that one ad. And that's just the profoundness of how that was taken in by a young mind. They'll never forget. They still talk about it now. It's quite something.
It's really important that HP, if they're going to run that kind of ad, they have to keep running that kind of ad.
Right.
The temptation will always be, I've got to tell you about my pixels and I've got to tell you about my ink prices and so forth. But rather than be famous for being an ethical company that exists in the world and understands there's a context. I exist in the world and there are other people. And my job is to leave this place better than I found it. It's very hard to persuade marketing departments because anybody in a marketing department is under pressure from the CFO to say, what are your, how much did we spend and how much did we get back?
Yeah.
And because of that pressure, they default to the short game because, I'm only going to be, the lifespan of a CMO is like 18 months.
Yeah.
Because they're held to an artificial standard of achievement, it's like firing a football coach because they didn't go from last place to the Super Bowl in one season.
Yeah.
You people are just you're so blind to the process. And, one of the things I like about that HP ad, the strategy behind it was to say, we're making certain decisions that are costing us money, but we're making it for a reason. And what that means to you as an HP customer is that you can feel good that, you're not patronizing some rapacious, organization who is really only in it so that the CEO can live in a gated community and never touch another human.
But there will be times where there is a really sensitive and controversial set of messages and a story you need to get out. How should people be thinking about approaching something that is quite sensitive, which instinctively it's either going to be divisive or difficult to explain, or it's going to cause one part of potentially your audience to go, actually, no, I don't think I want to hear that from you as that brand or that leader. How should we think about that?
I think the first thing is everybody needs to understand from you, the leader, that difficult situations do not present us with easy answers. And I'll give you, I had a very good friend. He was a Naval Criminal Investigation Service. They called it NIS. And he was former Marine. And he was assigned to I cannot remember. It was in a country very much like Yemen, but it was before much of the trouble. Okay, so he's there with a contingent of Marines. His job is to keep these Marines out of legal trouble with the civilian population.
Right.
So he's preemptive. He gets a call one day, and he's taken down to a crossroads where there's this conflagration between a platoon of Marines and a local population, a lot of shouting in Pashto or Urdu or some, okay, people are very upset, and the Marines don't know what the hell to say. And he comes upon the scene, says to the top sergeant, Sergeant, what's the situation? And the guy says, very jaded, well, sir, it seems 900 years ago there was this goat. Okay. And so immediately he goes, I want the Marines on Humvees and out of here. You have 3 minutes. And he said, because if they haven't solved this problem here in 900 years, I sure ain't going to solve it today. Now, this is true about a lot of problems. Anything that's controversial is controversial for a reason. There are no black and white solutions that make sense because somebody's going to get upset. What is needed here is an understanding from an audience that the decision maker is being very careful, very methodical and systematic, willing to listen to multiple points of view. I'm not going to come in here and dictate some blunt force trauma solution to something that is nuanced and has been developing over time. What I will do is I'm going to follow a method and I'm going to follow values. We will do the best we can in the circumstances. And you know the principles because I've said these before we got here. You know that what drives me personally and what drives this company. You also know what I will not do under any circumstances. Under these conditions, this is as good as I can hope for, is that you understand what's behind how I make a decision on this. So.
Very clever. And, you know, when you look at the way that a story has been successful, whether that be communicating something sensitive or whether it's the ability for somebody to act or to think differently, what is the objective measure of a story being successful?
So one, the listener understands there's a human being on the other side of this transaction. I'm not a salesperson. I'm a human being, which means we get a certain amount of grace for being imperfect. But it also means that I understand that you too are a human being. You know, Phil, we live in the age of AI. AI means that they're going to be able to scale outreach to us that's very self-interested. You know, they're going to be able to, you're going to be inundated by messages about this or that product. They're going to pay top dollar for the email lists, and then you're just going to be a fire hose of come-ons. In competing against that, you have to be more real than real. You have to be a little bit, you have to be yourself, because with warts and all comes proof that you're a human being. And in an age of AI, you know that term, the uncanny valley. It's when something has the verisimilitude of it looks human, but it's 5% wrong, and now it's creepy. As opposed to a cartoon, which is only 30% realistic, but it's kind of adorable. You know, you don't want a robot to look too much like a human being, because unless you can achieve 100% verisimilitude, you are, I don't know, that robot creeps me out. As opposed to it, you notice how Japanese companies like Toyota will make their robots, their humanoid robots, they'll make them very Japanesey cartoon character. Yeah, because they need you to feel like it's cute, not like it's creepy. Okay,
That's right.
So here we are in the age of AI. Your storytelling has to be warts and all. The more realistic it is, the more it's going to be really human.
You've seen a lot of partnerships over your time, whether it be between brands, between organizations. What is the cautionary tale that sits in the back of your mind when you're assessing the potential for a partnership and your spider senses start to tingle? What is that one in your mind that keeps it real for you?
Self-interest. So the Geiger counter that's saying this is radioactive is the hovering sensation that they would abandon me for $20. That this is always has been and always will be about the money. That, that it really is just transactional. And there's this is a kind of a popular thing now, this sort of bro culture, grind culture. Any kindness is interpreted as femininity. Let's face it, human beings we are a tribal animal. That is, you don't survive on the African savannah alone.
Yep.
You don't. Oh, in America especially, there's this image of the lone wolf. I'm a cop. I don't need a partner. And, the idea that the single cowboy rides into town and cleans up the town. This is absolute 100% BS. We survive and thrive together. And the bigger an organization you can gather together under common values, the more formidable you are. I want you to imagine a single hyena. How long is a single hyena going to last on the African plains? 25-minute life expectancy. But that's not how hyenas roll. Hyenas will roll around in cliques of about 20 to 60, and they'll attack lions. They'll take kill away from lions because there's a bunch of us and we're not scared of you now. By the way, quick footnote on hyenas that's frightening. Apparently, the spotted hyenas have intelligence levels that borders on chimpanzees. Like, they're that smart. And they're vindictive. They're vindictive AF. If a spotted hyena gets killed by a certain lion, they have very good senses of smell. That hyena pack will go back and get other tribes of hyenas to roll out with them, and they'll kill them all. They'll kill the whole pride. So you better think twice about killing a spotted hyena. That they're brilliant, but what makes them really dangerous is they'll come back with more. So, to return to smiles on our faces, when somebody is signaling to me that this is just out of self-interest, like they're not giving me an adequate explanation about why they're doing something, or how the two of us will survive long-term as a partnership, I want no part of this. I need to be able to turn my back on you. And it's like a lot of things that human beings engage in. If you really don't trust your husband to stay faithful,
yeah,
that's a problem.
It is a problem. And I really hope that as people have listened to this, they're developing an even stronger sense that the ability to forge a relationship under that common set of values, to acknowledge that you can't and should not go alone, is in fact a very, very good path to take. We're going to get to a couple of rapid fire questions in a second, Neal. I'm actually really fascinated to hear what your answers to these questions are. Before we get to that, and thank you for all of your notes on how partnerships should be evolving, particularly in just the world we're living in right now. What do you think leaders are missing right now about this potential and the power for achieving things together in partnership?
I wish that in my 20s, I had a better sense that there is so much more to be gained when you go together than by yourself. For example, in my 20s, I met 3 or 4, like, really, you just knew these people were going to go somewhere. They had a knack. Oh man, I had a creative team working for me. If I'd had my head screwed on, I would have literally gone to them and said, let's start an agency, because you guys are I've seen a lot, and you guys are the best I've ever seen. And why use your talents to make somebody else rich? Let's go out there and start hunting the bison. So I think if people recognize that when you meet somebody who is admirable, clever, hardworking, strongly consider, look, let's get together. I don't know what we're going to do, but let's do something. let's do something, because life is too short not to spend it with people that you admire.
Amen.
The phrase is, you are the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Spend time with.
Holy mackerel, that's true.
Yep.
So to return to the wild kingdom for just 2 shakes, wolves, the very phrase lone wolf is misused. A lone wolf will soon die. A lone wolf can't bring down a moose. A lone wolf can't do much of anything except catch rats. The lone wolf is subject to cold, hunger, and their soul. Wolves, like dogs, they need to be with other animals that make them feel good. Packs of wolves survive. Packs of chimpanzees survive. You, by yourself, this is not the natural order. You are fighting nature when you think you're going to go it alone. Therefore, let's think about the opposite. Not just that you're going to hang out with other people, but okay, let's start to look for the good ones. Let's start to look for people that show real promise and grab their belt loop, man. Let's see what happens. I wish I'd known that in my 20s. I didn't learn that until very late in my career.
Well, people are hearing it now. Let's hope that if you are 20 years old, you are taking this to heart, because it is exactly the way you should be thinking about things. Neal, let's dive into this rapid fire. And again, thank you for such amazing wisdom this morning. You ready?
No, but go. I'm terrible at these.
Complete this sentence.
All right.
Partnership is
trust. It's the one thing above all else you must protect. It's the bedrock. Be trustworthy.
What content are you loving at the moment?
I find myself spending a lot of time on TikTok, because the creativity of human beings is bottomless. It's astonishing what people can do with an iPhone. And
it's impressive, isn't it?
It is really impressive. In the United States, they're trying to make sure that, they can grab hold of TikTok and own it and keep it out of ByteDance's hands, because they can't control it, because they can't sway it and bend it and milk it and steal from it. And whatever the whatever, it's not that I trust the Chinese Communist Party any more than I trust anyone else, but I know who I don't trust right now. And that's the people that own our national media. They are the most untrustworthy group, the crap we get fed. So I love TikTok.
What's the worst piece of advice you've received, and why?
I can't say I've gotten a lot of bad advice. I can say that anybody who's not telling you that relationships are important is out of their minds. That, this very show of yours, your emphasis, is both timely and timeless. Partnerships are how anything great is accomplished. And it makes life more pleasant, along with being more successful. It makes the journey more enjoyable. If you could have a gold medal in the Olympics, Phil, I know personally, I would vastly prefer to have a team gold than an individual medal. And here's my rationale. If you manage to get a gold medal on an Olympic team sport, it will soon be forgotten by the general public who won the gold medal for rugby in 2014 or 2016, right? It will be forgotten. They won't remember the team's names, but you were on that team. And for the rest of your life, you can call anybody else on that team and you can relive that experience, that joy, that camaraderie, that play. You can be in your 80s and call them up and say, you remember that time we beat South Africa? And you're like, I remember that like it was yesterday,
And that's so true. It is so true.
So partnerships which are equal parts trust and capability and dedication and so on. But the joy of knowing that the journey can be shared instead of just trying to survive on the African plain. Like, that's just, I don't understand this impulse to make it all about me. I don't get that. I guess I don't understand a lot.
Well, tell me this. When you see potential for a new partnership, what's the first thing you do to turn potential into action?
Well, only just lately, I reach out and say, I have this impulse. I like the way that you operate. I have a great respect for your skills. I don't know where this could go, but can we just have some coffee and talk about what's on your mind, about the things you'd like to achieve? Maybe there's something here. I have the good fortune of people will reach out to me because of TikTok. They will reach out to me unbidden and say, if you're ever going to be in Terre Haute or you're going to be in Shreveport, let's get together for coffee. And I had this marvelously accomplished real estate broker in wine country in California say, let's do something. So we did. And we staged this event down in San Diego. And it was glorious. And it turns out we're going to do a lot more together because we just reached out. So that would be my thing is you don't have to have an agenda. You don't have to have a plan. It's like, let's just have a conversation and I'll bet something crawls out of this.
Oh, I love that. Okay. What is one thing, and I'll state that I often get in trouble for asking this question the way it's formatted because I ask about one thing that you're grateful for right now. A lot of people say, can I have 2 or 3? Yeah. And of course, the answer is yes. So what are you grateful for right now?
The first is that I married well.
Here.
If imagine, because I admired my wife, strong, doesn't panic. And it's when you can admire somebody and think, wow, that was a good choice. The consequences of failure are a giant disappointment, the dividends of success in this case. So let's stay with that for a minute. Same is true of business partners. If you guess right, holy mackerel. And if you guess wrong, it's dire. So being a good judge of a potential partnership. But I wonder if I could gild the lily here in just a little bit. I'm grateful for a lot, but I think I'm grateful most for the idea that the things, now let me rephrase this. I'm just going to start again.
Sure.
Everybody loves dogs. Most people love dogs. If you don't love dogs, And so, but dogs are, they're not perfect. They're a mixed bag. So I'll give you some objective qualities of dogs that are non-arguable. Dogs have to be walked all the time and they've got to be fed all the time. And you have to pay the vet for when they get sick, and they shed on everything and they vomit when they get sick on your best carpet. And sometimes they'll poop on everything and they'll chew stuff up when they're, and they are, they're an inconvenience a lot of the time. And if you travel somewhere, you got to board them or get some sketchy kid to, take care of them while you're away. And after you pour all of this energy, and God help you if they bite someone, now you're in real trouble. You sacrifice all of this and they die. And there's a good chance that will be among the saddest days of your life. So my question is, why do people love dogs? Why do they bother? Well, because dogs love you first. They don't wait. They don't judge you. My favorite thing about them is they don't look at you and wonder if they could have done better. Dogs are the blueprint for how to be for what will get you through a partnership. For all of their flaws, they bring you that one thing that we've got to have: companionship and trust. They trust you. And people will often tell you, oh, I love dogs way more than I love people. They deserve it. In a movie, you want to turn somebody into a bad guy, have them kill a dog. They are irredeemable at that point. Oh, now they hear, like, it's the John Wick thing. Why would John Wick go on a murderous rampage and be forgiven? Because they killed his dog.
Killed his dog. Yep.
Same thing in Road Warrior. They killed his dog. That is unforgivable. You know, you're at the pearly gates. You know, you've saved thousands of orphans. Yeah, but
there's that dog.
Yeah, killed that dog.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So that was pretty far afield. But when you were asking what I was grateful for, it's that I have been very fortunate in business, to have a lot of people who I would spend time with anyway. Your theme of partnerships, it's like, you have a choice. You can inculcate and select the people you do business with and not leave it to chance. Especially if you've got some years under you, you can say, you know what? Whatever happened to John Eric? That guy was magnificent. I got to do something with that guy. Well, you can. Reach out.
And you should. That's right.
Yeah.
Amazing. Neal, it has been just wonderful to spend this time with you.
Thank you, Phil. Same for me.
For people who have been captivated by this, storyfire.net is the place where you can visit Neal's work, his course, to get under the hood of the principles and the practice of how to do storytelling spectacularly well. Neal, where else can people find you in addition to that destination?
They can find me at nealfoard.com. Now, here's the problem. I spell my name funny. So you have to get out a pen. NealFoard.com. And I would encourage you to go to nealfoard.com, particularly Phil, you, because I'm doing an audiobook and I kind of like it. And the first chapter is free at at nealfoard.com. And it's called Rancho Madhammer. And it's based on a lot of life experiences, but it's also fictionalized in a lot of different ways. And I do it as a sort of premium on my Patreon page, so that anybody who's like a $5 a month contributor gets a chapter every month. And it's a cool story. So
nealfoard.com, spelt the way we just talked about it. Yeah. Neal, I look forward to our next conversation. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Phil. And God bless you for getting up so early. I really appreciate that.
Hey, it's Phil, and thank you so much for making it to the end of this episode of Partnership Plus. If you're one of the 61% of people who have discovered this episode and you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, please go ahead and do that. The bigger the channel, the bigger the guests. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next episode.